Hey everybody, I'm back to talk a little bit more about some hybrid cloud considerations, workload placement considerations, and let's get into it. So let's say that you're in a situation like this. A lot of folks are in this spot. You have a primary data center location where your data is sitting, could be cloud, could be colo. You have a backup facility that has a reduced subset of your data and your equipment in there that's more for a DR and compliance type of a scenario. And then you have something in your corporate office or manufacturing facility where you have equipment that is close to either your folks for end user operations or equipment that runs manufacturing, logistics, things like that, that has some gravity to your actual physical business. So one of the things to take into consideration is um, when you're looking at either lifting to the cloud or bringing devices back from the cloud is what is the gravity of the data? What is the gravity of the end user use case? And also, how can you leverage these existing assets fully? In the case of a cloud lift, the most common scenario is the first thing you would do is take that backup data center and then you would migrate it into the hyperscalers as a POC to validate all of your infrastructure as code, all of your user access and IAM, all of the bits and bobbles that make the cloud migration work. Then after you have validated that backup data center, then you would move your primary load because that has the most business impact. Then usually what would happen is your corporate office or manufacturing data center would be last, and those workloads would typically move into either a SaaS offering or some other type of an offering than where your production data would go. Or in the case of it being something like manufacturing or logistics, it may stay on-prem just because of the gravity compliance or just the needs of that facility. So that's the most common scenario, right? Is that your backup data center you would use as a proof of concept for migration. But there's other ways to look at this and other ways to slice it. So in this scenario, we have a bunch of mission critical business applications, test and dev, um, front end, back end, all in that primary facility, and then basically a pared down DR copy in the second facility, and then some local working data, command and control, back office stuff, and then the prerequisite, no one knows exactly what it is, workload that exists in every corporate office data center. So more common than not, this would be the most common migration plan. Like I say, you take that backup facility, use it as your proof of concept for the lift, get all of your Terraform or TerraGrunt or whatever infrastructure as code and scripting or migration tooling that comes from the hyperscaler or whatever to burn it in. Make sure you got your VPC is configured, your networking is configured, your ingress egress is configured, and all your migration process, all of your IAM and user access is configured, and then you use that as a proof of concept, migrate the workload over. Then after that, once that's all proved and everything is good, then you migrate your production data center. And then at the very last, you look at moving corporate data center or manufacturing assets to um, to either a SaaS solution like Office 365, Google G Suite, there's a few of them, or into some other type of a cloud offering. That could be the first phase, could be the last phase. Typically, those workloads work independently of your primary production data lake in your primary production front-facing applications, usually this kind of corporate or um, user or business facing applications tend to operate separately from like your e-commerce web front end or whatever other big apps that you have running in your data center. So this is kind of the normal way that you would see this shake out. And conversely, typically going backwards, what you would see is to come out of the cloud, you would first take that secondary AZ or secondary region and then script that with your infrastructure as code or whatever your lift considerations are and move that back into a colo offering. Use that to validate your egress out of the cloud before migrating your production data center load out of the cloud and into an on-prem or colo workload. This is very common. It's happening a lot both ways. A lot of people are still going into the cloud. Some folks are seeing cost constraints and coming back out of the cloud. It's kind of a two-way street these days. And this is still the kind of use your DR or secondary region as the canary in the coal mine for these migration projects. And then typically your corporate or manufacturing data kind of lives in its own kind of separate world. Now, this is what potentially this might look like post-migration. You get into the hyperscale cloud, you've got your big iron business applications sitting with a primary copy in one availability zone, a secondary copy in the other availability zone. There's some kind of working files or some kind of data that's required to either be striped across the two or would need a local copy in that local availability zone. And then you got kind of a front end and all the things. So it's kind of, then you kind of have your availability striped across multiple physical locations or regions, depending on how it's configured. And then you still have your separate kind of either back office data or your business adjacent data that lives kind of in that tertiary facility. So let's say that you did this cost analysis and you're trying to figure out, wow, the hyperscaler is really expensive or my colo is really expensive. How do I make the best use of my investment, knowing how much flexibility there now is in the hybrid cloud? Well, this is where the current geolocation of your existing footprint can really factor into how those assets may play into a hybrid cloud scenario. So say your corporate footprint or manufacturing footprint is closely adjacent to some of the West Coast hyperscaler presence, but your primary data center location is in a place like North Texas where you don't have an AWS region or you have lesser regions for GCP or Azure and maybe only a metro pop. So it may be less useful from a hyperscaler or hybrid standpoint, but your backup, your smaller backup data center might be right in the hyperscaler corridor of Northern Virginia, where you're right in the middle of all your major hyperscaler players. That might be something that is a very valuable asset where it might make sense to leverage that backup data center as more of a bare metal cloud adjacency for cost savings and scale, and then possibly move some of the data center assets as into more of the hyperscalers and then maybe vacate that primary data center, but keep your backup center and not use your backup data center as as much of a POC for the migration topology. This is where things can really get interesting. So you have a corporate or manufacturing facility that has some kind of mission critical power and networking capability into it, and you have a backup data center that's in a region that has a large hyperscaler presence, then you can really leverage both your physical or colo data center assets and the close cloud um, hyperscaler regions to best of breed for both. So you can take your big iron storage, networking, um, file servers, database servers, your big, difficult to refactor applications that have a lot of your biggest business value and your biggest business intelligence in there, and keep them where they're cheaper to operate and easier to throw hardware at in your colo racks or in your corporate data center, and then use the hyperscalers for what it's really good at, which is things like orchestrated containers, on-demand scalability groups, load balancers, WAF, CDN adjacency, um, durable scale out storage like S3. These things are much cheaper and easier to do in the cloud, but then big high performance storage for these legacy or business centric home built applications that have a lot of business value are easier and sometimes cheaper to manage in your own data centers. So then this kind of allows you to do kind of the best of both worlds, which allows you to leverage what would have been just a DR facility that you would just be migrating off of as a POC as a cloud adjacent high performance backend that you can then use a Megaport or any of those other services to then plumb into the hyperscalers. You can use the hyperscale front end to give you comparatively cheap scale out front end and application hosting that is CDN adjacent, that is has their WAF. You don't have to buy WAFs, has their load balancers, all of those things at a comparatively reasonable price. Because once you get into bigger metal in the hyperscalers and high performance storage and things like that, so it's where your cost can really spiral. So then this kind of gives you the best of both worlds, and that backup data center that you were originally seeing is just kind of a throwaway that was just for compliance reasons that you were going to migrate first as a POC becomes critical to your hybrid cloud strategy. Same with that corporate data center or manufacturing data center that was just kind of a thing that you had because you needed that data adjacency or you needed that adjacency to either your users or the equipment that your users are using for logistics or manufacturing or whatever it is. Then you're able to leverage those assets fully and able to leverage the hyperscale cloud for what it does really well. And that's just a thought about kind of looking a little bit differently at your existing application and how those pieces might fit into a hybrid cloud strategy. Thanks, guys. See you later.